Uh, Good afternoon. Um, we 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 would like to start our, as you can see, very informal conversation. This conversation is an introduction to a project we are trying to develop in this last month. The group composed by myself, Stefano Boeri, Maddalena Bregani, Tommaso Sacchi, and Lorenza Baroncelli. We are trying to imagine a online platform that is called The Tomorrow, that would be made as an exchange of letters inside the territory of contemporary Europe. This idea, that is a very simple idea, I would say almost banal, comes from the fact that in our life we experience every day Europe as a city. It's very easy, at least for a certain relevant minority of Europeans, to live, for instance, in Madrid and, I don't know, work in Geneva or these kind of things. And to this territory that is growing more and more connected, at least for certain parts, does not correspond a conscious collective public debate. This is very clearly missing on a political level, but it's very clearly missing on a political level because it is also missing on a cultural level. I would like to start this conversation by questioning this thing. So I think we need to break this situation and to imagine a debate that is both interdisciplinary and international. At the moment, we have international debate in the different disciplines, and we have a more general cultural debate that proceeds country by country, still pretty much linked to the linguistic borders. We imagine that the easiest way to start this was to start the process of letters, pretty much in somehow in the way Europeans intellectuals in the 18th century wrote to each other sorts of public letters that were clearly addressed to a person, but they were normally read by a larger group of intellectuals gathering around the sender or the receiver of the letter. And we started this process by sending in the last month like 50 letters, around 50, to several Europeans intellectuals, and we started so far to receive some answer. We will start, the project will start to be available online in September, and we think that what we need to discuss now is the very possibility of what we are doing. So if this thing is somehow neutral on a political level, or if it already implies certain values, then we need to discuss what is the format of this thing, because we thought of emails as something extremely common, almost banal on a technological level, but somehow also slightly outdated, that exactly for this reason could operate on a time frame that is not the one of Twitter or this type of totally immediate media, and for this reason occupy a bit of a larger space that allows for also a bit of a slower reflection. At the moment, writing an email start to be something a little bit more pensive, where you take a little bit more time. The other issue, and here I will stop, is the language of these. Of course, we imagine to do these in English, but the English that we used and that will be used in these is not proper British English, so it's a language that is somehow clumsy. But it was also clumsy, the French, that was the language of the intellectuals in the 18th century. It was also clumsy, the Latin of the Middle Age. So this is probably something unavoidable, but it's also something that to a certain extent has potential. And also this is a political issue. To what extent we are into a multilingual space, and how much we want to defend this multilingualism, and how much it's terribly impractical, and so we go beyond that. So as a beginning, I would like to give the word to Stefano, and then I think you can spread the conversation to all of the guests.
Thank you so much. I think, well, Pier Paolo has very well explained the starting point, the concept that convinced us that it's now urgent to, let me say, offer the possibility of a conversation. We are here, and we are here with Michel Magnier, who is the director of the culture and creativity sector of the Direttorato Generale of Education and Culture of the European Commission. And the reason is that, in a way, all this started within a roundtable promoted by the European Parliament some months ago, who is trying and has tried in these last months to develop a new narrative for Europe. And well, we were within all this, so the idea of the tomorrow, the idea of the web journal was also related to this experience. And at the same time, we are a little bit outside this kind of process. And the reason that we are convinced that it is absolutely necessary and important to develop a narrative on Europe, because Europe is, in a way, so important, so strong, and so uncertain. And but we are also aware that in order to develop a narrative, we need to develop a conversation, because we think that probably one of the best metaphors of Europe is, from a side, the idea of that Europe is like one unique big city. So we move in Europe with this kind of feeling. But we also know that it remains an archipelago of islands with their own trajectory, their own individuality, their own stories, and so on. So the idea is to think that the model of conversation is a very good model in order to guarantee the individuality of every single element of this archipelago, but at the same time transmitting the idea of a possible common future. We think is the best way. So I love to ask to the director of Creativity and Culture, how does he think that this could work, and how do you think there's this relation between the idea of narration and the idea of conversation? Thank you so much, Mr. Magnier.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. Don't worry about clumsy English. That's exactly what we spend our time speaking in Brussels, and that's the lingua franca we have to use. So it's good for understanding, and multilingualism is of course a positive thing, but when it comes to communication, unfortunately, we have to use English. I normally start talking to people about culture by a quote from the president of the commission, my boss, José Manuel Barroso, who said last year in Vienna that culture is the cement that binds Europe together. By which he meant that the European project is not only an economic project or a trade project, it's also a political and a cultural project. And I'm very pleased to see such a project being developed, because it goes exactly in the right direction. The European Union is not only a single market. Another quote from another president of the Commission, Jacques Delors, 20 years ago, used to say that nobody falls in love with the single market. And I think that's true, and everybody can see this reality around us. You don't need to analyze the results of the European elections 2 weeks ago to see that people actually are looking for something else. So what do we do to try and promote this idea that the European Union is also a cultural project? We insist basically on two major things, and I believe they are relevant for what goes on around in this beautiful place. The first one is that the cultural diversity is at the heart of the European project. We don't want to build a global European culture. We want to safeguard what makes us unique, and that's the cultural diversity of all our people, all our countries, all our regions, all our cities. This is really an asset of the European Union in an increasingly globalized world. So we try to support all actions which go in this direction, promoting circulation of works, circulation of artists, co-productions, so that we can support cultural diversity. And the other thing we try to do is also to acknowledge the fact that culture and cultural and creative sectors are a significant part of the European economy. At the moment, 8 million Europeans have a job in the cultural and creative sectors. And the creative and cultural sectors amount to 4.5% of the European gross domestic product. So there's a source of growth, a source of employment that the European Union can't ignore. And the competitiveness of our cultural and creative sectors is also something important for our future. So how we go about all this, I don't want to explain you in all detail what we are doing, but basically there is funding for culture, funding to support cultural diversity, and funding for support competitiveness of the creative and cultural sectors. We have a new program whose name is Creative Europe, and in a context which is a bit special, where the global budget of the European Union has been reduced for the first time ever, the budget of this program has increased by 9%, which is not a big amount of money, but I think the important part of it is that there's a political message here that culture actually matters. So at the moment we are in a very intense moment, because at European level there are plenty changes going on. I'm very excited about it. I hope you are excited too. We'll have a new parliament, we'll have a new commission, so possibly we'll have a new agenda. And of course, from where I am in the European Commission, I'm pleading very strongly for culture to be higher on the priorities of the European Union. And the project, as you just presented it, I think go exactly in the same direction. So I'm very grateful for your invitation, and I wish the best to this project.
Thanks a lot. And well, we are today here also with another, if you call it, a subject which has been extremely useful and helpful in the starting of this the tomorrow experience, which is Matera. Matera is one of the cities who's running for become the capital of European culture in 2019. So I'd love to give the stage to Joseph Grima and then Paolo Verri, but maybe Joseph, you are at the same time one of the most, let me say, relevant thinker in the architectural field, and also, if I'm not wrong, the art director or something like that of the Matera project. Joseph.
Thank you, Stefano. Yes, it's great to be here with Paolo in these very intense days of countdown towards the presentation of a project that will be the synthesis of many years of work that will really bring to the table, much in the way that the Tomorrow does, a vision of what the role of culture is in Europe. And I think for this reason it was so important for Matera 2019 to be part of this project, because in a way what you are attempting to do, which is to form a new voice, a new media platform that will reflect the reality of cultural production in Europe today, Matera is attempting to do exactly the same thing, and to really think about what the role of culture in the life of citizens is. And so over the last couple of years, and in the preparation of the first bid book, the first dossier that was handed in, it's really built on the foundation of a very simple idea, which is to use Matera as a laboratory for the production of cultural citizens, to think about how actually citizenship can be reflected through a kind of a cultural program that really permeates everyday life throughout the city. And this is something that's important not simply for Matera, it's something that's not going to be the beginning and end in 2019, but it's an attempt to make to give a new prominence, a new importance to culture that can then spread from the south of Italy, from Basilicata, because it's also important to note that it's not simply Matera that is the candidate city, but it's Matera, Basilicata, it's an entire region. And from there will spread throughout Europe and hopefully also throughout the world a new understanding of the importance of culture in contemporary society. And so in a way, I think what you are doing with the Tomorrow, which has, as you mentioned, Pier Paolo also has a political dimension, we're really attempting to do on a kind of an urban scale to make the whole of the city into a sort of a laboratory in which this idea can be tested. And I think one of the reason, and a second reason why it's so important that Matera is the host of this project, the partner of this project in Italy, is that Matera is a city that has really reinvented itself from, it's one of the most extraordinary examples of a sort of a reinvention, a rinascita, from a condition of vergogna nazionale, something that was literally a cause of shame for the country, to something that is already a cause of great pride, but we believe over the next 5 years, but also 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, can actually be the route where innovation in the cultural sector really takes root in this country, and where a place that the whole of the country can look to find its future. So to invert in a way the kind of polarity that we understand between North being the leader and the South catching up, Matera wants to leap directly into the stage that follows this and to be really a leader of the future of Italy. And so I think it's also it's great to be here in the context of Monditalia and of Rem's very close examination of all that Italy has been over the last 100 years. I think it's fantastic that Matera can be a sort of a North Star for the future. Maybe Paolo, you'd like to add a few words as well.
Really few words, thanks to Stefano and all the members of Tomorrow. From my perspective, there is something linked to long-term issue. I think that it's impossible to change the world in the next 5 minutes, or 5 days, or 5 months, as everybody claims to do, and everybody start thinking it's possible. I don't think so. We are working for next 20 years, next 40 years. We need, as Stefano said very well yesterday, confidence in dialogues, and not very short dialogues, but long, large perspective of dialogues. And also, I remember the closing of the Le Città Invisibili, the invisible cities of Italo Calvino, when Marco Polo telling to the emperor, is saying that when we start talking something about our heart and our passion, we start losing about that. And it's similar to Europe nowadays. After 15 years of Europe, we have the feeling that we start losing Europe. And it's not the right way. It's something like we cannot transform something that is in the soul of everybody in a correct love for our new nation. And to have long-term love with a nation that's Europe, we need really to let become generation working about that. So Matera, because it's a city using the category of jagged diamond that could be collapsed, it could be despair from the world. And 50 years ago, because it was the poorest city in Italy, with nobody that could live longer than 50 years old, nobody reading a book during the year, nobody having the possibility to go to school. Only 50 years ago in Italy, nowadays is a very good example to use culture to think to new economy. So not to think culture as an economy, but to reshape the economy, the social style of life through culture. That's why we wanted to put on the table this kind of matters to tomorrow and discuss with all the 27, 28 members of the European Union going in that city that could be Guimarães, could be Turku, could be Umeå, could be the smallest and narrowest city in Europe where we needed to know if the feeling is exactly the same. Really, we wanted to have Euro from the culture perspective. Really, we wanted to change our economy and have a more shared economy. Everybody that is living actually in Europe, and I conclude, our life will be 20% longer than our grandparents, will be the 30% more free than our grandparents, and we will gain the 40% less than our grandparents. That's a very big issue. That means that we will have a very long time to share with people. To do what? To gain money or to share idea? To build up a new occasion, to understand what does it mean life? Or I don't know what is the word to say mazzette or exchange of money. As we are, the new narratives of Europe, for my opinion, is to change, for example, the perspective of Italy. That is not the right place to gain position through money. Italy has to become the right place where to work very simply for long-term perspective. That's my opinion. That's why we support strongly the tomorrow. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this higher expectation and the very ambitious vision need to operate also on a very practical level. When we started thinking of this idea of the tomorrow, there was this combination of a reflection, also of a political ambition to a certain extent, and on the other side, we always had the problem of a format. How can this thing operate? How can it be interesting for an audience and not only like boring thing somehow imposed from the top? And how can this thing can be practical and can work? And what is the format of this thing? And I would like to know, I think Ludovic had the possibility to develop similar projects. I think you were involved in a project called The Day After Tomorrow at a certain moment in San Francisco, if I'm not wrong. And I think you are dealing on a daily basis with issues of format, how to frame a conversation, how to expose it, and my question is a bit about that. Do you think there is a space for a discussion that is run like this, run through like a correspondence, like exchange of letter that is so, in a way, outdated and is so much into a time that is somehow in between? That's also the reason for tomorrow. Tomorrow is a future, but it's kind of an everyday future. It's not the future like the tomorrow of the rising sun of a 19th century socialism. It's tomorrow. It's relatively also banal to a certain extent, but it's also not forcedly today. It's also, and I ask you, what is the space, the format that you could imagine for this thing?
Thank you, Pier. I think it's a question about format. That's true. I'm a graphic designer, so I'm used to, by every content, ask which format is the right format. And after the format is a question of distribution. So which distribution make the ideas as quick as possible bright and known. So back to your question, the title of the project was not The Day After Tomorrow, was The Day After Reading. So, and I make a really short summarize about the project. So I went to San Francisco and make interview every day with citizens of the city, San Francisco, and I asked them to tell me their memories about what they read the day after. And it was a very, very, very exciting experience, because it happened maybe the opposite what you are planning, that people, by talking about what they read, they automatically associate personal issues of the news they were reading. And on one point, all the content of the newspaper of yesterday moved to a personal content, to a personal vision of those news, and get maybe then at the end of the day get to the format of a letter, because a letter is a personal format, is a personal text, is maybe the most personal text ever. And this is why letter, I think, as a starting point is very interesting for your project. And now, how can we distribute this format? This is the question. I don't know. For me, culture is based on language. And if we talk about newspaper, what my project was based on, those people, they all use their own language and almost the language of the city. They made a portrait of themselves, talking about, or let's say, relating the news they read to personal histories, personal experiences they made in the city. So it was, on one hand, a personal portrait, on the other hand, a portrait of the city. And out of those two axes, it generates a kind of more global vision on maybe what could happen tomorrow. So I think to start in a very local position and to try to make this position to a personal view, and then make this personal view accessible, readable for everybody, I think change the way that we are consuming information, because tomorrow is about how do we just consume all the information, and I think that's the main issue. And funny-wise, this newspaper project I did in San Francisco 6 months ago, there are still people buying it, reading it, and telling me it's amazing. But actually, it was the news 6 months ago, so the news never gets delayed through this personal view. And maybe this is a key of tomorrow, changing the axe of not being anymore objective.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, there was always this attempt to blur up the things, to put together a more personal dimension. So you write a letter, so it's personal, and you clearly address to somebody. So again, it's quite direct, quite personal. At the same moment, there's a public moment. And there's all these little frictions, all these little disconnection that we try to introduce in the format, to keep it very simple, but somehow a bit problematic. And this, I think, because it is our experience that contemporary journals, newspaper, are a bit losing grip on reality because of this excess of communication. And And I think what we wanted to preserve is this privilege of distance, not an incredible distance, but a little bit of distance that somehow allows you to be a bit more free and think of something also a bit less immediately associated with every day, what happens every day. And for these, I would like to ask to Emanuel, given that you're Swiss, so you're a bit aside from these European conditions. So in a way, you at the same time you're totally immersed, because anyhow you leave the space of Europe, and also of the, to be more strict, of the European Union, because you're not only you're surrounded, but you work, you move in a context that is definitely European, but somehow not totally belonging. And I think this is also an interesting condition, because it allows possibility to probably understand the model even better than we who are directly involved.
Thank you, Pier Paolo. First, I want to congratulate you to that project. And it's true, you were talking about the letter and the distance that is needed in order to be in the position to write the letter. And this distance between Europe and Switzerland is maybe one issue. And what is, of course, upsetting me a little bit is that Switzerland seems to turn more and more into a sort of a role model for all the European countries, and this is not necessarily a very good trend. But I'm so excited listening to your proposal and to comment on this initiative, because I can honestly say that there is a need, a personal need for such an exchange, and Switzerland is such a narrow country that you would die if there is not this exchange. And so I consider it a personal need to write a letter. And that brings me to the second thing, that we heard kind of the official, European government support for such a project, but that's always top down. A letter is personal, and at least when I write the letter, and I love this old-fashioned term, it's almost, you said it's very intimate, Ludovic, it's also very monumental nowadays, a letter. So I write sometimes in emails where I go first into Word format, and I write it in Word, because I don't want to take the risk to push the send button before it's really there, So that's already the letter. And so it's monumental. You consider it a real statement. And to do that, at least myself, I need an urgent need. Or I'm really angry, or kind of totally excited, or desperate because I have a real question. And therefore, I think there is the potential of your initiative. We're talking about Europe and connection and networks between Switzerland and other countries, doesn't matter. You put it on a personal and kind of very fundamental basis. And this is what I'm really excited. And of course, while you were talking, I was asking myself, who is the first person I would address to my letter? This is an interesting question. I don't know who would answer to this question of the first letter. Maybe it's already written.
Yeah, well, maybe it's a bit nasty, but I think you wrote such an extremely direct letter to Rem Koolhaas, like recently. Maybe you can explain these.
Yeah, why not? No, I was, in a way, at the same time, part of the group of us is going to promote the tomorrow, and I was, in a way, witnessing also the efficiency of this tool. But very simple, maybe you have seen in the Corderia there is a film who is an interview that I have recently done on one of my recent projects who has been built in 2009 in Sardinia, in the north of Sardinia. It was a project developed for the G8 summit. But you probably remember that in 2009, a few weeks before the starting of the summit, Silvio Berlusconi, who was at the time the Prime Minister of Italy, decided to move the summit from Sardinia to Aquila, where a tremendous earthquake has killed a lot of people and a lot of victims. And so this idea was to move the G8 in a place where all the most powerful politicians from all over the world could experience what happened and hopefully help Aquila to start again. And I think you know that all that story was extremely dramatic and with a sort of dark side, because a few weeks or a few months after the decision to move from Sardinia to L'Aquila, the Italian judge, was in the condition to show that there had been a sort of dark side who has followed all this process of construction of the La Maddalena site for the summit. And all this process was conditioned by corruption. So corruption of politicians, corruption of real estate companies, corruption also of part of the intellectuals, the professionals, the technicians who were involved in the process. So something which is not so different from what is happening exactly in these days here. Exactly in these days here, because you know that yesterday, or better on Wednesday, we have opened the newspaper in Venice and we have seen that the mayor of Venice has been arrested for corruption and so on. So that's Italy. So I was part of that history, who was at the same time extremely strong for me, because I was not born in La Maddalena, Sardinia, but from different reasons I'm strongly related to that island. My mother, who is an architect, has built probably two of their best products in architectures in the island. So for me, that experience has been extremely intense and extremely strong. I put all my passion, all my efforts, but was at the same time a failure, because now the situation of that place is that it has been abandoned, because the judge revealed that the civil protection who had to clean the water just to realize a maritime port immediately after the summit didn't do that. The civil protection didn't clean the water were contaminated by years and years of presence of the Italian Navy. So in a way, the maritime port is a dream. So will never open because the water are not available, and also that means that the restaurant, that the port, that the hotels, that the conference center, and what we have built is useless, and it is in a state of abandonment. So just to tell you this, because during that interview, I was thinking, how can I use this experience? And I immediately think, well, I'd love to discuss with this Rem Koolhaas, because Rem Koolhaas in a way is a maestro of what we have around here. In a way was a person who, knowing very well the experience of the G8 and Maddalena, was convincing me to talk about that experience. And well, I was thinking, well, how can I involve Rem? And within Rem, through Rem, let me say all the architectural field in such a delicate and I think at the same time a necessary discussion on failures, simply on failure, on the fact that we as architects are normally not used to discuss our failures, not used to explicit our failures, not used to learn from our failures. So we were working with the Tomorrow, with Paolo, with Tommaso, Maddalena, Lorenza, and I immediately think, well, let's use the Tomorrow. So I've written a letter through an email to Rem Koolhaas saying, dear Rem, I'm here, I've done this experience. It has been really problematic and difficult because with Ilabeca and Louis Lemoine, who did the movie, we have texted them many times how to find the right way to put on the table, put on discussion that experience, because it's at the same time intimate and public. So it's very complicated, it's political and psychological. It's, and finally we find I think, a certain kind of balance that you can judge. I cannot do it, but so I've written a letter to Rem saying, well, don't you think that this is a problem for architecture? That architects never speaks about unsuccessful. never speaks about fiasco, never speaks about failures. We are only used to talk about architecture like a sequence of mythological successful, one best than the other. And that's something that I think is nowadays unacceptable. It's also unacceptable if you go and see what is happening in the Mondo Italia, which is one of the best exhibition I've ever seen in the last years, but there are not architects saying, well, we have been part of this. So I think that also from that point of view, the fact that we are now so sophisticated in describing the tragedies, the dramas, the unsuccessful of the society, without being part of the stage, without being part of the group of protagonists of the history, it's problematic. And Rem was answering. And is answering with a letter, which is an email, say, well, the point is the market, but I don't want to anticipate. You have to read, you have to go on the website that we are constructing for the tomorrow. But this is a very important conversation. So I think I cannot send an SMS to Ren and say, well, let's talk on this. I cannot use WhatsApp or Twitter, and I cannot write a letter. So email is the best way, but the point of email is that emails are not public. That's the reason I immediately understood that we were in the right direction when, with Pier Paolo, Tommaso, Maddalena, and Lorenzo were thinking to the idea to promote a sequence of exchange which are public because are exposed, so everybody can read them, but not public because not only can intervene on that. So that's a conversation we started with Ramkulas. I hope that the conversation will go ahead, like other conversation. One is with Samos Kitai, who was here, and this is the tomorrow.
Yeah, because one of the things we were thinking, it's very simple, is that when we write, like, let's say Stefano writes to Ramkolas and receives an answer, then it's possible to somehow redirect this answer to somebody else. So you, like the editorial, our little editorial groups play like kind of DJ, spreading around this thing and somehow, how to say, dubbing the emails and somehow generating also quite unpredictable combination, because then at a certain moment you will receive a fragment of a conversation among Stefano and Rancolas, blah, 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 and then this is sent to, I don't know, Amos Gitai, to somebody who's relatively far away from the topic maybe, but that we also think might have a certain interest in the thing. And so I think also this might be interesting in the project, this combination of extreme authoriality. So you write to somebody, it's quite personal, it's a letter, but at the same time it's also very kind of anonymous, because this is then spread, and I think this relative combination of relative lack of hierarchy and absolute directness can somehow trigger something. And I think we are in a world of mixed formats in which we are always experimenting about formats, and I think this is one of them. And yeah, I don't know. I leave the microphone to Joseph to speak about this possibility to experiment with formats, even very old and very...
Azzurra.
Thank you. So perhaps I would make a couple of comments from a little bit more lateral view, because I was involved but not very much into it. So what I would say is that I find really interesting two aspects in particular. One is that, let's say, the speculation on language, because it's not only that you use, as you said, clumsy or rough English as a mean for communication, but it's also that, I mean, I can use any mean that I find, that I'm used to, that I find familiar. So if I am a photographer, I can send you a picture to express a concept, or if a filmmaker, I can send you a movie. Or I mean, it's a very mixed, you know, language, and this is, I think, really interesting about this. And the other thing that was quite interesting to me is that idea of thinking about Europe not strictly as a geographical area, but more as a, let's say, mental or cultural space. So, I mean, you could exchange letters not necessarily with people that are inside the European Union with all, you know, the let's say, uncertainty about borders, which kind of convention, etc. But you could also think that that European is also someone who lives in Tokyo or in any other city. This is more of a cultural state. So I would say this, and okay.
Thank you, Azzurra.
Yeah, Joseph.
I just wanted to make a note regarding the format that we recently did a project actually in the Parliament of the European Union, which was the results of an open call that we did at Domus for designs for a bridge over the Euro-African Strait across the Strait of Gibraltar, connecting Europe and Africa for the first time through a work of infrastructure. And so we invited architects and artists and anybody who was interested to submit an idea to send us a postcard from this imaginary bridge in the future. And we were invited by a member of the European Parliament from Portugal to do an installation in the central foyer of the Parliament. And what was interesting is that project actually was the result of an epistolary exchange, a series of letters that were written between the Belgian philosophers Dieter Lezager and what was the Dieter and I'm having a blank on this, and Lieven Descartes and Dieter Lezager. And for several months they sent letters backwards and forwards and had this kind of ongoing exchange that was then published by Jennifer Siegler in the Hunch magazine. And this was an incredibly powerful, it's something that was really I think it was a testament to the power of the letter as something that's deeply personal, but that can also be very, an incredible medium of research and of mutual provocation. And so I think that's it's also when it goes beyond the second level, when it's not simply a letter and an answer, but then it becomes an ongoing conversation. I think that's when it really becomes most, and others join the conversation as well.
I just have a question. You mentioned, Pier Paolo, before that testing the format or also elaborating on different kind of overlapping ways of using it, that you would perhaps act as a LJ, a letter jockey, to cut pieces or to spread. All right, because that would be, yeah, it's also possible, but it's getting a bit risky, isn't it? But and then can one like apply to get letters that are, or how would you spread them? Actually, that's an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah, we will write, like we already wrote several letters, and we also received like, I don't know, 20 answers so far, and we will start to spread around also the letters. And one thing I forgot to mention is that we will publish only letters that already received an answer. So if we send a letter to somebody and it doesn't become an exchange, it doesn't become public, we also think it's not correct to show that. We will only show things that are already public, because the person who received the letter accepted the public dimension of the exchange. That's also why we think we can then redirect these exchanges, and that's also why we at the moment don't think of cutting and modifying, because it's a bit violent, I think. If there are questions, I think there's a microphone there.
I want to see that there are a lot of people in the public, like Federico, Nicolaus, Richard Nelson, Markley too, so that I would really love to involve them. So if you here.
I have something to say from a more personal perspective. My relationship with Europe is a bit problematic or not so obvious because I'm not European. I'm coming from Israel, and my relationship with European culture and, let's say, European narrative is very problematic because it was edited for me, and when you make a narrative, you need to edit things in and and edit things out, things left out sometimes. I'm coming from I'll be a bit more precise, I'm coming from a family that comes from, let's say, Middle East Arab world, and in the process of making Israel and importing European culture, this culture has been, or the culture that I'm coming from has been, let's say, extincted, completely overlooked. And I'm working with, for some time already, with another culture that is completely ignored. Palestinian community of unrecognized villages, unrecognized already says a lot. It means that their culture and their narratives are not being taken into account. So when you talk about cultural narrative, national narrative, global narrative, European narrative, it's interesting to see and to understand how you edit things in and edit things out. For instance, I'm curious, a letter is, let's say, it can be an interesting tool because it can open or introduce voices that you usually don't hear in the top-down narrative. Let's say UNESCO, for instance, when you talk about these big cultural institutions, it's always about or it always represented the majority rather than the minority. So I'm interested to know if in the tomorrow you will consider different voices, not just the obvious ones, the ones that are not heard, because Europe is not white anymore. There are so many other voices to be considered. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well, the tomorrow is a project that is plural by definition, because we address a multitude of individuals, and it's also a project that will expand, because every person we address then will have the right to involve freely other people into the conversation. So we somehow define the format, but the amount of people involved we do not define from the beginning. So I think, I also think that maybe what you say somehow also questions the format, because the letter we consider an extremely open format. But actually, if people without literacy, they are automatically excluded. That's quite banal, but it's a lot of people. Personally, I think if the project is at least intellectually honest in recognizing this, that for instance, this is a project that excludes people without literacy, but that's also in a way unavoidable, because the letter is relatively good tool that allows you to do certain amount of things, and these things are only possible inside the field of literacy. And of course this is problematic, but I think the letter is a tool that allows you to problematize what you're doing, and that's already something, at least. And this, I think, is all what I can say, because then I think it will depend on the content and on the subjects involved. On the fame. Not on the fame of people, but more on the content of what they're... Yeah, it's really on the content of what's going to be written in. And also, I would say, I cannot tell you now, I'm sure it's gonna be inclusive, I'm sure we will listen to everybody, because it's not so obvious. I think it requires everyday effort to try to keep the thing open, and maybe we even fail in doing that. But for sure the issue is present to us.
One of the dominant, let's say, ideas that's been since the present of this discussion is somehow culture and economy are always considered either dependent, or culture becomes economy, or economic becomes culture. Either, at least that's the kind of sense I got from a few people. But that means that, but is there a possibility where the kind of exercise that is being done here, the kind of practice of writing letter, in itself can be considered as a culture in itself, you know? I mean, why do we have to kind of look at culture always in terms of cultural production of objects or materials, but rather can culture be simply 100 people writing letters to each other? Because that's what you open your argument with, saying that in the 18th century, people used to write letter, and that was a format of a culture that you kind of want to bring back. I mean, why always? I mean, we have this kind of dominant thought that cultural production is always about material production, but it could just be about association between 100 people, or the Europe, basically. Could you probably have to say something about? If
I think that this is the right format of the question, and in a certain way you are simply witnessing the fact that you can use it tomorrow. So if you want to write the question and send us, we will send your question to the person that you think would be capable to answer. So that's the best answer I can give you now, because I really appreciate the point that you are focusing on.
Yeah. Any other questions? Sí.
Thank you. Out of the format of a letter that could be even very stylish if you force too much. But I think what is interesting, what Stefano was saying, and this new format of the email, it's raising a new way of raising questions. The number of questions you can get through an email format, which is behind the answers of your new, let's say, new format, it's unbelievably big. So in the old format of the letter, a few persons which were literated were exchanging comments, information, opinions, and private pictures maybe sometimes about their lives. But the letter is nowadays also the way that citizens, the only way that citizens have to access chronicles. I would say if you are not a regular contributor of Corriere della Sera, I want to make a comment which becomes public on a national level, you can write a letter to that, a newspaper. So in this sense, I think the format of the letter, which is private, on a private state, becomes immediately public on your new magazine. So my question is, what about the selection of the answer? Is a sort of open platforms, and how it avoids to become a blog, and how strong is the editorial selection that you make behind it?
The editorial selection is only in the answer. Then if I write to you, then, like the rule we gave ourselves is that what you answer to us, we publish. By answering, you accept that it's public, and we receive it, and that's it. So in a way, we want to keep it extremely direct and without too much editing. So we will not edit the content. We just start this thing in a kind of cadaver esquisse exercise, and then whatever comes is okay. And it's these also brutality of the format that I think avoids the thing becoming a blog, because a blog is mainly defined by the style of the writer of the blog. It's a very authorial thing. And what we are trying to do is a bit in between, I think. We are authorial into writing the letters, but we are relatively neutral in receiving in and processing that.
Thank you.
I want to add something, Piero. I think it's a very good question. The last two we had, it's about how to edit. And I think this is maybe me and between the public and you tomorrow. I think this is the question, because your format is a letter, but actually it's making out of a private source an open source. And this is back 10 years ago. It's a completely established system. And I'm asking, is this the output, creating a sort of new outsource or new open source, or is it about how do you edit and how do you publish the editorial rules, which generate also a very specific or generate precise readers? If you say you edit the letters under the view of cultural interest or under political interest, is already two completely different spread. So I'm interested in the rule. How the hell do you edit the content? Because open source is not a topic anymore, and emails is already completely passed out. It's finished. So maybe email will be the next web page tomorrow. I don't know. So back to you.
Yeah, well, I think we are really left with your questions. That I think it's the best way to conclude the thing, because, yeah, well, we will try to deal with it, and I think it's not just a one-liner answer. I think we will deal with these for the next, I don't know, couple of months. And in the website, the platform will be online on 8th of September 2014. Yeah, and I think there
is a website where you can more or less check.
You can check. There's now a very simple website that gives little information, and on with some letters, and on 8th of September we will have the proper project online. I think we are now forced to conclude. So thanks for coming.